And great, we are live. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here. It is Friday. So happy you made it. This, of course, is Food Safety Chat Live. My name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every Friday, we do a topic on food safety. And this one's going to be a little different because this topic is so huge, so important that we're going to have to do it in two parts. And I'm really, really happy today to have my good friend Rod Wheeler here with me with the Global Food Defense and Asset Protection Institute. Rod, my friend, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be back. It's always good to join you, Brian, on a Friday morning. You know, what better is there to do than to not listen to these food safety chats on a Friday morning, right? And I'll be honest with you, you know, a couple of times I've missed them, but I have to tell you a secret. I do record them so that I can listen to them later. Why? Because there's always such good information that's being shared.
Well, thank you. And that's what we try and do. And so if you're new to the chat, one of the things that we love to do, and Tim is on the board here right away. Good morning, Tim, is let us know where in the world you're at. And part of this, and what you'll notice with this as well, is that this is interactive, right? This is not meant to be a webinar or a presentation where we throw a bunch of facts and figures at you and then you go away. This is meant to be a conversation. So you'll notice here in the chat, my assistant Renee is in here. And he does an amazing job of helping to moderate and ask questions, fire away. This is the perfect opportunity to ask a industry expert on food defense. And a lot of times things get missed in this, right? We're so focused on the food safety and is our food safety plan correct and things like this, that we miss the hazards right on our doorstep. So this is a golden opportunity to ask Rod these type of questions. Good morning, Gene. Nice to see you. Of course, I'm in Loveland, Colorado, and it's a little north of the Denver area. It's not Loveland, the ski resort up in the mountains. A lot of times people think that those are one and the same. They're actually different. They do a cute thing here in Loveland too, Rod, for Valentine's Day. You can actually have your love letters sent to Loveland. They'll stamp it with a special Valentine stamp on the outside, mailed from Loveland, Colorado, so that you can send it to your sweetheart. So,
oh wow,
people volunteer to do this, and there's like a waiting list to do this that is years long. Believe it or not. Yeah, wow. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, people love it.
That's amazing.
And actually in town too, this is kind of neat. And I did this one of the first years when we moved here is, so on the main road in town, they have, of course, the light poles in the middle of the street, and you can buy a Valentine. So it's big. It's like about 2 feet tall. And you can put like, Brian loves Beverly or whatever on it and have it posted on those so that you have a little Valentine out there for loved ones. So that's always cute. So where in the world are you at today, Rod?
I'm here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., obviously, which is where I live and where I've been and where I served as a homicide detective for many, many years. So the weather here is beautiful, knock on wood, but it gets very humid here. But it's a real nice place to be. If you guys don't have anything better to do with your lives, visit the nation's capital. You know, I know what we hear on the news and all that kind of good stuff, but let me tell you, there's a lot to see here. And real quick, Brian, there's a lot of history here in our nation's capital. The Smithsonian Museum is here. And I'll tell you, if you haven't been lately, you really should try to make it here because there's a lot of good happening here in Washington, D.C. Don't listen to what you hear on the news or, it is what it is, but it's a good place to visit. And it's safe, too. It's safe. Believe it or not, it's really safe. I know we hear these horror stories, but it's really a safe place to be. Hey, right before we began, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, Brian, but I do want to, if you don't mind, just mention the name Bill Pursley. Mm-hmm. Bill Pursley is someone that we all know, and he passed away about a month ago now. And I just wanted to acknowledge him. Bill was someone that I've known in the food industry. He left a legacy, and he is a legacy in the food industry. He died suddenly a month ago, so I didn't want to begin our discussion, without at least mentioning Bill. Bill was with AIB International, as you know, Brian, mm-hmm. for many, many years. He headed up their food safety department. And to him and to his family and his lovely wife, Kitty, just want to send out our thoughts and prayers and our condolences. So thank you very much for that, Brian.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that's part of, and I know part of the motivation, I'm sure you feel this way as well too, is part of the reason we do what we do is to, I think you mentioned a really important word there. It's legacy, right? We're helping to create programs and systems and processes to help protect food and food safety and these type of things that hopefully will continue on long after we're gone. And I think that's a perfect example of how that works. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Yep. And another thing that we need to do here before we get started as well is good morning, Frank. Good to see you again. And of course, Austin out here as well in the Denver area too. You beat me to it. Yep. We have to have our drink here. So I've got my coffee and Rod has his
Coca-Cola.
Yep, absolutely. So everybody, please join us. So I've mentioned this before on the show, Rod. This is a heated mug from a company called Ember. No affiliation with me. I just love the product. And anytime I have any problem with these guys, this is what's great, right? A lot of times, people complain about, it's like bad customer service, and people complain. I wanted to point out good customer service with these guys because there's an issue with the mug and it's just a little bit of chipping inside. No big deal, right? I'm probably being too rough on it. But I contacted them and said, hey, am I doing something wrong or am I cleaning it incorrectly, whatever? They're like, no, don't worry about it. Free mug on the way.
Really?
It's like, well,
wow.
Thank you, right? I wasn't trying to get a free mug. I just wanted to let you know, but thank you. So the next day I got the FedEx notice that it's on the way. So thank you, Ember. That is
great.
Really
and it's really good, Brian, these days when we can find, and I believe we still can find a lot of good. There's a lot of good people around. Like I said, we hear these horror stories all the time on the news, and there's a lot of good people around. So I think I think we're stronger together. And if we're positive moving forward, we can get past this nonsense and make our country great again. No political affiliation, but
But it's absolutely. And so one of the things Renee will put in here at the end is, sharing this type of food safety information. And one of the things that popped up, and we share this on Locals, and you can find this story here as well. It's a free site where you can get information like this. And this segues really well into what Rod and I are talking about here today is intentional adulteration. And there's a guy that was arrested in Italy, a 47-year-old guy, obviously has mental problems, who was threatening to inject water and food in supermarkets with cyanide. And so luckily they caught this guy, right? I mean, there's these type of things out there all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an excellent segue, if you will, Brian, into what we're going to be talking about today, which is vulnerability assessment, utilizing your process flow diagram to help as one tool to help you conduct your vulnerability assessment.
Absolutely, and this is part one of two, right? So this is a first for the Food Safety Chat. Rod has so much stuff to cover that we're having to do it in two parts. So this is part one of part two. So Rod will be back next week as well, which is awesome. So definitely stay tuned and pay attention to what Rod's got to say. So I think first off, right, is we'll kind of back up here a little bit and we'll ask a layman's question here, right? So I'm a new guy here and I'm watching this presentation. Mm-hmm. What is intentional adulteration and this rule that people talk about?
Sure. So intentional adulteration is an act whereby someone intentionally, right, with various motives. Okay, you can have a number of motives why somebody would do this, but they intentionally try to contaminate our food products to either harm people or for protest reasons or economic terrorism, food fraud, things like that. So that's what intentional adulteration is. It's when someone intentionally, and that's the key word that you want to underline, intentional. Some people may be thinking, Brian, well, what's the difference between food defense and food safety? Because food safety protects our food as well. And you're exactly right. The difference is that one word again, intentional. So for those listening, maybe not know, take some notes as we go through here, Brian, because there's going to be a lot of good information that you not only hear, but you can actually utilize at your own facility. So you definitely want to get pencil and paper or pen and paper and take some good notes as we go through this discussion. Even though it's not a presentation like a webinar, I'm still going to share some good information with you guys that you can utilize, especially when it comes to conducting vulnerability assessments.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, especially right now, Rod, I've got clients out there and they're experiencing tons of pain in supply chain. Yeah. So for example, we talked about recently sunflower oil. Who would have known that most of the sunflower in the world, sunflower oil comes from Ukraine, right? So now all of a sudden nobody can buy it, which opens up the door for intentional adulteration and fraud, right? Hey, do you have some sunflower oil to sell me? Sure, right? And you don't even know what you're getting, right? So that type of adulteration is something that you need to look out for, and that intentional activity to fool the public. So I think that's a a great background, right, in using that vulnerability assessment. And as we dive into the topic here, right, I think that I like your approach here because you're using a lot of existing things that we've already kind of gone through. And the first one that you talk about is the process flow diagram.
That's right. And the process flow diagram, as I mentioned earlier, Brian, can be used as a tool in which to conduct your vulnerability assessment. Now, some of you all may be wondering, well, is that all that I need to conduct my vulnerability assessment? Well, the answer is no. You need to do more than that, which we're going to get into a little bit, if not on this discussion today, next Friday's discussion. So you definitely want to come back for next Friday's discussion. But you can utilize your process flow document. But let's go back just a little bit, right? Where does the vulnerability assessment begin, right? Do it begin at the plant? Does it begin on the process line? Where does it begin? Believe it or not, when you do your food defense plan, okay, step one is to put together your team, your food defense team, those individuals that's going to be on the team. And that the team can be comprised of managers from the facility, frontline employees. It could be anyone that you want to be on that team, but make sure that they play a critical role. You just don't want somebody on the team to say that I'm on the food defense team. You want somebody on the team that's actually going to participate and bring good information to the team and to your food defense plan. So then once you put your team together, now you want to start talking about conducting your vulnerability assessment. Now, your vulnerability assessment is required as part of the FSMA IA rule. That's step one, folks. You have to do your vulnerability assessment actually before you even write your food defense plan. You say, okay, well, why do you say that? I'm glad you asked. The reason that you have to do your vulnerability assessment first is because you're going to write your food defense plan based off of the results of your vulnerability assessment. So let me give you a quick example, Brian. A lot of times clients will call me and they're going to, a new client, and they're going to say, well, Rod, we need to write a food defense plan and have food defense training. And you know what I always tell them, and I've done this for years, and I'm sure some of the listeners that knows me have heard me and seen me do this before. I always ask them, have you done your vulnerability assessment? And then they'll say, not really. And I'll say, okay, not a problem. Let's do the vulnerability assessment first, and then we'll begin to talk about training and writing your food defense plan. And each time I've done that, folks are always ecstatic about the fact that it made so much more sense to do it this way than to try to write your food defense plan without having conducted a vulnerability assessment. Now, when I tell them that we're going to do the vulnerability assessment, what I always ask the client is to send me over a copy of your process flow diagram, which we all have, right, in the food industry because we have to use it for HACCP.
Right.
Now, they send me the process flow diagram. And what we can do together, we can look at the process flow diagram before we actually do the walk around in the facility, right, for the vulnerability assessment. And with the process flow diagram, we can start identifying, right, those critical areas, some in which you've already indicated in your process flow diagram for food safety. Let me give you one more quick example. And I always ask this question to folks when I give speeches and presentations. Your facilities where you have critical control points, a lot of times I'll ask the question, what critical measures or what mitigation strategies do you have for food safety at these critical control points? And people always say things, Brian, like, we have metal detectors, foreign object detectors. You know, I always ask them, do you have a camera facing that critical control point, recording all the activity around it? And the room always becomes a little silent because what some companies will say is, well, we have a camera looking directly at the processing line, but not the area around this critical control point. Oh. And then I start explaining to them why it's important that they look at the area around the critical control point. And then it's like a light bulb turns on. It's like, you know, we've never looked at it from that perspective. And that's okay. But that's the whole purpose of conducting a vulnerability assessment utilizing your process flow diagram.
Here's an objection I get sometimes relative to cameras. I'm curious of your reaction on this is, well, totally get what you're saying here, Rod, relative to cameras, but our employees don't like it because fill in the blank, right? It's a union plant. They don't like us. They think we're spying on them. These type of things. How do companies respond to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you know what? I knew you were going to say that, ask that question, because that's where I started smiling. Because look, I've been doing this for over 20 years in the food industry as far as food defense. And I've heard that as well. But here's the turnaround for that, right? cameras are actually there to protect all of us. And it's not to spy on employees, even though there are some companies that may utilize it for that. And I don't think they should, right? I think they should only utilize it for what it's there for. And that's to protect the employees and to protect the integrity of the product. You do get some pushback. Real quickly, Brian, let me just share with you. I had a case once up in Minnesota, right? It was at a grain processing facility. And you know what was happening? Someone at this plant, they had like 48 ingredient silos, huge grain silos, right? And someone was taking the little, the earplugs we wear in food facilities. Some of them have a little metal piece all the way up in the earplug, right? So what someone was doing was taking these little metal pieces out, throwing them over into the grain silos. Now, that's not a good thing to do, right? Well, this happened 4 times, and it was caught at the critical control point. The problem here is that if one of those or if some of those little metal pieces would have gotten into the product, that could have been disastrous for this company. Now, this company spent over $100,000 cleaning out their silos and all kinds of things to try to prevent this. But the question was, who was doing this? They didn't have cameras at the tops of their silos. Now, write this down, folks, because this is important. And I guarantee you, you may have not thought about this, but you need to have cameras at the tops of your silos facing, all silos on the top, they have a hatch because usually there's a breathing element up there. Right. That's the place where people can throw something in. So you want to have a camera facing that, and you want to have that camera set to an alarm whereby it sends you a message if it detects some type of movement. Now, some of you all are thinking, what about birds and things like that? There's ways that you can get around that. But that's one of those takeaways. You definitely want to have cameras in your facility, and you got to establish a good rapport with your employees. And that's why, Brian, I mentioned earlier, when you come up with when you designate who's going to be on your food defense team, you definitely want to have 1 or 2 frontline employees to help get that message out. Because let me tell you, if they're involved in the process, it's much easier to implement some of your security measures. And especially if you have a unionized environment. If you have a unionized environment, I highly recommend that you have 1, if not 2 members of the union on the team.
Right. Well, and then part of this too, right, is my key takeaway from this is 2 points is tools are only as good as the people using them. Right. That's so right. If you're a bad management team, guess what? Right. It's going to come across poorly to the team. And the second point I think that you made is super important as well. Right. You need to, just like your food safety plan, you have to have involvement. And I love your point around the union side, because if you have the union steward or somebody who's on the union team who can explain to everybody else, it's like, no, this helps. And if anything, right, if there's a grievance or something like that, we have more information to help with our cases. So this is a win-win.
Absolutely. Going back to that case that I had in Minnesota, when I went up there and I started conducting the investigation, and by the way, I was able to determine who the employee was that was doing this. That's a whole nother story. You got to come to part 3 of this training of this podcast in order to get that story. But I was able to identify this individual, even though we did not have video surveillance. But again, that's another reason why you definitely want to get the involvement. You know what? The other thing is, when I met with, and this was a unionized environment up in Minnesota, when I met with the union leaders and we got to talking, they were the biggest backers of food defense at the end of the discussion. I mean, they were so happy that I was there, because I told them, I said, this saves all of our jobs. Yeah. We don't want someone in our facility that's doing something nefarious like this. And they were like, you know what? You're right. Let's get them out of here. And they helped out a whole lot. So it's all about building relationships with your employees and with the union.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Now, I mean, part of this too, right, is I'm sure you get this as well too, is like, hey, Rod, saw your presentation. Love the story about the silos and things like that. Here's an email with some documentation. Can you remotely write us a food defense plan?
Excellent question. So what they're asking for is a tabletop review. Yeah. And yes and no. And I can always I can begin to write a food defense plan, but let me tell you, it's nothing like having boots on the ground, seeing the facility, Brian. It really isn't. And I've said this for many, many years, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers right now have heard me say this. look, your first vulnerability assessment should be conducted by someone from the outside. Now, you can do your own vulnerability assessment after that first one is done, but there's a reason why you want that first one conducted. And you may say, well, what's that reason? Well, Rod, I'm glad you asked. The reason is because when somebody from the outside comes in and do a vulnerability assessment, they're looking at your facility from a different lens, if you will, than you are. I mentioned the name Bill Pursley earlier. I'll never forget, years ago, Bill Pursley accompanied me on a vulnerability assessment. And halfway through the assessment, he was scratching his head. Now, Bill had been in the food industry for ages. He said, Rod, I've never looked at a food facility from that perspective. And that's okay. And then he became the biggest supporter of vulnerability assessments in food defense after that point. But it always happens. So I do recommend that you utilize somebody from the outside. Now, one other piece to go with that, Brandon, I know we're kind of limited. I don't usually talk that much, of course. But when you do your vulnerability assessment, folks, think of your assessment as you walk through. Think from the perspective of the bad guy. Okay? Think from the perspective of the bad guy. Don't conduct your vulnerability assessment thinking from the perspective, well, I need to comply and check this box. I need to comply and check with it. No, you're doing it the wrong way. You're going to comply with the IA rule. But when you walk through the plant, put on the hat of Osama bin Laden, literally. Put on the hat of the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston bombers, right? Put on the hat of the Uvalde shooter, the Pulse nightclub shooter. These are individuals that's out there today. And I'm talking about the mindset. I say that figuratively speaking, that mindset. These are the folks, when we walk through our facility and we're doing a vulnerability assessment, if I was Osama bin Laden, what's the best way to harm this company? So one question, Brian, that I always ask managers when I begin a vulnerability assessment, I always ask them, what is the reach of your product? In other words, how many consumers will come in contact with the product or an ingredient from your facility over the next 30 days? And you know what I usually hear? Millions. Millions. Great. That's wonderful. Now ask that same question. Let's put on Osama bin Laden, and I say that figuratively speaking. Let's put on Osama bin Laden's hat. Millions. What does that mean to him? You see what I mean? It means this is the place to hit. And that's how we have to look at this, folks, when we do our vulnerability assessment. You know, Brian, real quickly, I was out in Fresno, California a couple of years ago at a major food facility, and they were having some new construction done. They were having a whole new section of their building built, right? Huge facility. They got about 500 employees. But what I noticed was interesting. They had a lot of construction workers walking around, which is fine. They were having a new building built. When you walk into the lobby of this building, there's a huge banner that says, a proud American company, we serve millions daily. That's what the banner said in the lobby. Great. Good American company, great American company. But again, now put on the Tsarnaev brothers hat and read that banner. Does it have a different meaning? I submit to you that it does have a different meaning to them.
Exactly. So two very important points of what you just talked about is, number one is fresh eyes, right? It's always advantageous, right, to have somebody who doesn't know your facility with the expertise to come in there, right? And so for food safety, I do this all the time, right? And you're looking around and think it's human nature, right? There's things that our brain can't take in everything that's around us all the time. And we filter. We don't even realize it, but we filter. And that those fresh eyes coming in there gives that new perspective. It also kind of reminds me, the banner thing reminds me, I forget who did the quote. If anybody in the chat remembers who this is, I'd love to remember who it was. But there was a bank robber like in the 30s. And they said, well, why do you keep robbing banks? And his response was, that's where the money is.
Yeah.
That's where the money is.
Yeah.
So there's some great questions coming here, guys. I love this, right? This is a great opportunity to ask Rod these questions. So a LinkedIn user asked here, how often should you analyze the information from the cameras? Is only used as reactive when something happened, or can this tool be used for more preventive actions?
Excellent question. I think the answer is a combination of both. I think you can use it proactively, and you can obviously use it reactively. Use it proactively from time to time. You may want to look at video footage for different reasons just to see what's happening. But then obviously reactive, if something does happen, you can go back and review the video footage. So I think you can use it for both. You don't have to monitor it though. And I think this is what the person was asking. Do they need to monitor these cameras 24/7? The answer is no. But you do want to record the video. And let me tell you, folks, recording video these days, the price has really come down. The hard drive, all you're doing is basically recording it to a hard drive. And the price of hard drives have come down cheap, really. I mean, you can get 10 terabytes for a couple $100 and, you know, save your data on that. And I say that to say this, so you can store video for a pretty long period of time before needing to rewrite that that database. So are you still there, Brian? Brian, are you there? Can you guys hear me? Can anyone hear me? In the comments section, can you just, if you can hear me, just type yes in the comments section.
I think somebody didn't want us to hear what we were talking about. Holy moly. That's so I started having a little bit of glitches on my side, and then all of a sudden it was gone.
Really?
Yeah. So my internet here at my house just went down. This is the first time it's ever done that.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't see anybody else in the chat anymore. Broadcast is still going. So let's see. So Renee's back. Let's see. Well, that was crazy, Ron. So we are still broadcasting, by the way. So hopefully people can still hear us. Julie. So we have at least one person here. I've been doing this right now over a year and a half, and this is the first time this has happened. Granted,
Really?
you always get little glitches and things like that, but
Sure.
So Tim's here, Cheryl's here, Frank's here. Wow, guys! So this was on my side. So evidently, Osama bin Laden's got access to my internet.
I know. You didn't like what I was saying or something. I don't know.
He reached out from beyond the grave and said, "Enough of this. We're done. We're done with this."
It's all right.
We're going to forge on. We're going to make this happen here. So we left off with the vulnerability assessment, and the question was, how often do you actually look at this information? Can you use it preventively as opposed to just reacting to things?
Right, and the answer was yes. You can use both. You can use it preventively, and you can use it reactively. But you should always do your vulnerability assessment and reassess your assessment at least once every 2 years. Now, that's not a rule that's part of FSMA, but it is a guidance from the FDA that you should revisit your vulnerability assessment at least once every 2 years. Now, I recommend to my clients that they do what I call mini vulnerability assessments at least once a quarter. And like, for example, some of my clients have me email them each quarter a section of the plant that I select that I want them to start taking a look at and maybe answer a few questions about, things like that. And that kind of keeps you on your toes in terms of, making sure that you're monitoring your vulnerabilities. Now, speaking of monitoring, now that is a part of the IA rule. So you do, and this is important, folks, write this down. You do need to monitor whatever mitigation strategies that you put in place and make sure that they are working. If they're not working properly, then you must do corrective actions. Now, we're going to talk more extensively, as you know, Brian, next Friday about mitigation strategies, because what do you do when you identify these vulnerabilities? But let's go back real quick and talk a little bit about actionable process steps. Now, the IA rule talks about actionable process steps. You can identify actionable process steps utilizing your process flow diagram. So just picture in your minds for a second, folks, your company's process flow diagram, right? Where would you say the critical points, not critical control points, but the critical points are in your process, in your own process? Well, you know in your mind where your critical points are. My question that I would ask you, and I would ask you in a group in training, how do you define the difference then between a critical point and a critical control point? And you would have an answer for that. And then I would ask you, if that's the case, what about from a food defense perspective? How would you identify a critical control point in a process or on a process flow if you're doing a vulnerability assessment? How would you identify that? Once you identify that, that is where your actionable process step is. Write that down because that's really important, folks. Actionable process. What does that mean? It means exactly what it says. This is a step where we must take action to mitigate or reduce the risk at this point in our process. That step is based on a number of factors. Now, the FDA talks about 3 particular elements that you need to be concerned about. And I'll go through these very quickly, Brian. The one is the potential public health impact, right? How bad could a situation be? Now, these are what you call the 3 elements, folks. So write this down. The 3 elements that the FDA is looking at, right? Potential public health impact. How bad could a situation be to the public in general if the product was contaminated or adulterated at that point? Number 2 is the degree of physical access. How easy would it be or could it be for someone to access these critical areas? Let me give you a quick example. I do a lot of vulnerability assessments at dairy facilities, right? There's a lot of access points at dairy facilities. If somebody wanted to get in and, cause harm to people, where they could actually do it, because they use a lot of vats, they use a lot of mixers and things like that in dairy facilities. Well, you got to come up with a plan, mitigation strategies to reduce access to these areas. There's a whole lot of different ways you can do that. And we're going to talk about that next Friday with the mitigation strategies. What are some of those ways you can reduce access? The good news about this, though, folks, is that you can reduce the access, implement a number of mitigation strategies without having to spend a ton of money. There's ways you can do it and still, do it within your budget. And then the third element is the ability of an attacker to contaminate the product. So in other words, how much contaminant would be needed to contaminate this large vat of dairy product, let's say, for the action to be successful by the bad guy. So those are the three elements that you want to consider as you walk around and you do your vulnerability assessment and as you look at your process flow diagram. So go back to the beginning of the process flow diagram. Usually it's product coming in. When a product comes in for the first time, that's an actionable process step. Why? Because your product is very vulnerable there. So let me ask you this, and we all take product in and ingredients in, right? Ingredient receiving. Do you check the identification of the driver that's dropping off the ingredients? Do you have a video record of that whole transaction of that product being brought in? Do you have that recorded? Is that under video surveillance? And things like that. But we're going to get more into specific mitigation strategies next Friday. But these are the things that you need to start thinking about now if you haven't. Once you have all of these things identified as far as your vulnerability assessment, now it's time to start writing the food defense plan.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you touched on the subject, and it's not showing up in the chat now because of the break in the technical issue there. But Wanda had asked a really good question too, and you touched on this, Rod, is wow, this sounds like a whole lot of money. How do I get engagement with my leadership team to write that check?
Yeah. Excellent question, Wanda. That's the hard part. Good.
Always.
Let me tell you, I can tell you right now, you come to these types of podcasts where you learn such good information on a whole range of topics. People like myself with a law enforcement background come out to your facility, put you through the training. You attend some public training courses. You got all this good information. You run back to your facility. You want to share it with the leadership so they understand what the potential risk is. And then you know what? They look at you like you have three heads. Yeah. They're like, it's not going to. How often, folks, do we hear that?
Oh, Rod, you're overreacting. We've never had a problem before. What are you worried about?
We don't have crime in our city. We live in Chicago. Right? Right? I mean, you hear it all the time, right? But here's my response to that. And many of you all have heard me say this for years. Folks, the bad guy can try over and over and over again until he gets it right. But guess what? We have one opportunity to stop him when he does gets it right. I don't want to see anyone on the news, 6 o'clock news, saying, we never thought this would happen to us. But we hear it every day these days. Every day we hear some horrific situation that's happened. The news is interviewing people. And the first thing folks say is, we never thought this would happen to us. Brian, go back to that story you shared right at the very beginning. Can you just repeat that one more time that you read about where the guy contaminated something?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I'll be posting on Locals. Let's see if I can find it here real quickly. So this was a 47-year-old man in Italy who had threatened, here it is, had threatened to contaminate food and water in supermarkets. And so he claimed he would target water and food items and inject them with cyanide, thallium sulfate, and rat poison if he was not paid a ransom in cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Now, what makes us think that can't happen here? Well, guess what? It's already happened here. It happened in Michigan. In Michigan, a few years ago, we had a guy going around the grocery stores and some of the major grocery store chains, and he was putting rat poison in the salad bars.
I remember that.
Poison in the. Remember that case? Yeah. Rat poison in the salad bars, folks. If it can happen in Michigan, trust me, it can happen anywhere. It can happen in Loveland, Colorado. It can happen wherever you go. So what does that mean to us? It doesn't mean that we have to, be naive. What it does mean is that we have to be vigilant. And we have to put those processes in place that can reduce or mitigate the risk. And we also need to be able to identify potential situations that may be brewing, which is another podcast that we'll hopefully have by October, because there's things inside your facility. And I don't want us to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but Brian, a lot of my clients always say, Rod, we think our greatest vulnerability is going to come from the inside, not from the outside. In other words, they think it's going to be a disgruntled employee, a contractor, a temporary worker, somebody that has access to the inside. And you know what I say to them? They're probably right. I believe that too. So what do we do about it? There's a whole lot of things we can do about it, but that's the podcast in October.
So what about, let's say you have a potential vulnerability in your process that you've identified with your diagram, and that's already been covered. Do you need to have another mitigation strategy?
Excellent question. And the answer is no. As long as it's been covered, and as long as you've articulated that in your vulnerability assessment report. Now, there may be some vulnerabilities that you've identified as a result of your process flow diagram, but you don't think you really need to do anything at that point for whatever reason. You know what the FDA says? They say that's fine. Just articulate the reason as to why you don't think. What's your reasoning behind why you don't think you need to do anything at that point? And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be acceptable.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, part of this too, this comes up very often too. So as somebody who's coming in and auditing a facility, and I start asking questions, it's like, okay, do you guys have a food defense plan? Are you managing risk? Can I see your plan? What's your recommendation to your clients then regarding that? Because I mean, obviously we don't want to advertise our vulnerabilities.
Right. Another excellent question. This could be a 3-hour podcast, Brian, with your questions, but these are all great questions, I'm telling you. My recommendation, and again, I've been doing this almost 20 years, is to not show your vulnerability assessment results to anyone.
Right.
Your vulnerability assessment, folks, need to be in a separate document from your food defense plan. Now, the FDA has made it clear you don't have to show them the results of your vulnerability assessment. They just want to know if you've done one. They may want to see your food defense plan, which is fine. You can show them the food defense plan, but let me just tell you this and put an asterisk by this. Don't give anyone a copy of your food defense plan to take with them. If someone asks to take a copy, it could be a third-party auditor. Tell them no, that would be a violation of your food defense rules. You don't want anyone to take a copy of your food defense plan out of the facility. But again, with a lot of my clients, what I do when I do vulnerability assessments, I issue a certificate of vulnerability assessment completion. You put that certificate with your food defense plan, and you can check that box because that is accepted. Why? Because you can go to my website and see all the areas that we cover in general for any vulnerability assessment that complies with the rule.
Exactly. Well, and then part of this too, right, is criminals and people who are attempting to do harm, right? They're not stupid, right? So that, they're going to case places and look for things too, right? So if they've decided that a particular industry may be a good target because of your 3 rules, right? All right, this is a food that's widely distributed. I have access to it, and I've got something that can be widely put into this product so I can, potentially harm a lot of people. They're going to then start casing places, right? And if they see ones that are secure and they see cameras and things, they're going to move on, right? They're going to move on. So you want to make sure then that you're not the one that's being targeted.
Yeah. Well, Brian, criminals and terrorists are almost exactly alike. They pick and choose their targets. They sit back, they'll watch how you operate, and then they will strike. Real quickly, and I know we don't have a lot of time. I've only said that 100 times now. But real quickly, I had a case about 5 years ago. Your listeners will find this interesting, folks. This is a true story. Myself and a colleague of mine, his name was Lance. We used to work together at AIB. And we went to do some training for a particular company on food defense in one of the states in the United States. It was a major company. Now, to get to this company, listen to this quickly. You had to go up a flight of stairs to get to the conference room where the meeting was going to be, that's where their general offices were, right?
Okay.
And the meeting was in a conference room that had a glass pane. Now, we were all in this meeting, And you can see out in the office areas from where we were. While everybody was talking in the meeting, I was kind of looking out in the office areas. Now, listen to this. I saw a guy who had supposedly come into the facility to fill out a job application, right? And at the time, they were doing it where people would come in and fill out an application. But look at how he was filling out the application.
Oh.
Now, that's not how you fill out a job application. You know, you fill out an application like this,
Yeah.
right? You know what this guy was? It looked like he was drawing a diagram of the inside of the facility. Step one in a terrorist attack is to draw a diagram or take a picture of your target. That's step one. So my colleague, I hit him by the elbow. I said, Lance, look at that guy over there. And everybody in the room said, what's going on? I said, look at that guy. He looks like he's drawing something. And he was literally doing like this. So the HR manager was in a meeting with us. She said, I'm going to go out there and see what he's doing. You know what happened? She goes out and she asked the guy, she said, sir, let me see your application. And you know what he said? No, I don't want to turn it in yet. She said, but that application is our property. He said, no, I'm getting out of here. He ran down the stairs. He went out and he got into a car with no tags on it and took off. What was interesting is the name that he gave, check this out, the name that he gave the receptionist when he came in that morning was the same name of someone who worked at another facility on their West Coast, at their West Coast facility.
Wow.
Now, how ironic is that? We never found out to this guy who that individual was or is. Here's the question, though, for all of us, Brian. We never found that guy. Is he at your facility today?
Mm-hmm.
Because he sees your facility as a soft target. You know, criminals pick and choose their targets, folks. I've been doing this a long time. Trust me. Terrorists pick and choose their targets. They're going to go, like you said, Brian, they're going to go after the soft target. It's the same way when you walk down the street. You know, don't have time to talk about it, but I talk a lot about street smart. You've heard me talk about that before. Yeah. You know, criminals, street criminals pick their victims. Everybody won't be a victim of crime. They know who to select as their victims. They pick and choose their targets based on a number of variables.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So if you're walking down the street and you're a 6'4", 250-pound guy, and you're paying attention to what's going on around you, nope. You know, they're going to move on to somebody else, right? Same thing. You have to be vigilant. Exactly. Yeah. A friend of mine says it. Yeah. He used to work in law enforcement too, right? Head on a swivel.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yep. Cheryl asked a good question here. What's the best way to start the culture change in a plant who has had no problems in the past?
Share these stories that I'm sharing with you, Cheryl.
Yeah.
You know, feel free to share these stories. Look, if it happens somewhere else, don't think it can't happen to you. And you may live in a community, which is great, where you haven't had these issues, and hopefully you never will. But here's the thing. If something were to happen, you want to be ready for it. And that's why I preach all the time about mock evacuations, testing your food defense plan. I'll tell you something else I do a lot of, which I'm going to talk about next week, is penetration tests. Okay. Penetration. I'm doing 2 penetration tests this week coming up at 2 different companies in Ohio, right? Why? They have a food defense plan. They got a vulnerability assessment, but they want it tested. And what is that? They want me to come over to their facility to see if I can get into the plant. So I have an orange bump cap. I already got a red hairnet, and you know the drill, right? And I'm going to go over there and I'm going to blend in with the temporary workers to see if I can get into the plant and if anybody stops me. And I've made them a bet of a hamburger that I think I can get in.
And I bet you can.
And I want my hamburger.
Exactly. And there's a saying I heard recently too that I think applies here really well too. And I think Cheryl, this will help too. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
You're absolutely right, Brian. How often, like I said, do we say, you know, we never would have thought this would happen? Look at the Uvalde horrific shooting down there.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, children. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, you know, somebody would have thought, because you look at what happened in Sandy Hook. Same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody thinks this. So Kim brought up a really good point here. And this is something we've kind of talked about a little bit as well, too. So I'd be very curious about your take on this, too. is one of the things that came out of COVID and all these type of things is delivery services. Grubhub and, not to name companies, but all these different people, right, who hire gig workers and things like this to go pick something up for you and bring it to your house, right? Oh, hey, I want a hamburger at McDonald's. Let's get that delivered. Who's delivering your food?
Yeah, I mean, ask HelloFresh. They had an incident. You've heard of HelloFresh? They do the fresh meals. They had that same exact incident, Cheryl, where one of their drivers, he did something nefarious. I don't know what he put into the product. The companies now, though, they are trying to use some type of a security measure in the packaging. Just yesterday, for example, I ordered something at my home, and the first thing I looked at was the security measures on the packaging. I know most of us aren't looking at that, but I'm looking at that. The guy brought the product, and it had like a seal on it, like a seal over the flap of the bag. And it said, if this seal is broken, do not eat this product. Call the store immediately. And the seal wasn't broken. I mean, I looked for that. So that is a security measure. I got one other client, a major client that delivers pizzas. I'm not going to mention their names, but I actually worked with them in coming up with a seal very similar to what was on that package yesterday. So I think companies are really trying hard. Even McDonald's, they're trying very hard to try to mitigate the risk. Now, can they eliminate all the risk? Absolutely not. Will a vulnerability assessment identify all your risk? Absolutely not. But remember, the goal is to make it difficult for the bad guy, folks. That's the whole goal here. And that's the goal of FISMA, the IA rule. The FDA, the Office of Criminal Investigation at the FDA, we all know, all those in law enforcement, we know that no matter what we do, somebody's going to find a way to penetrate our systems. We get that. But remember, our goal is just don't make it easy for them. Make it difficult. Let me tell you, if they're going to get into Cheryl's plant, if they're going to get into Wanda's plant, they got to go through Cheryl. They have to go through Wanda, and they're checking everything. When was the last time you walked through your facility, you walked past a contractor, someone you didn't recognize, and you did a double take and ask yourself, who is that guy? Why is that guy here? I mean, just think to yourself.
Yeah.
When was the last time you've done that? Or do you just assume, like I will have on an orange bump cap, that I'm supposed to be there?
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, it goes back to your example of the conference room with the guy, doing whatever he was doing on the paper.
Sure.
Situational awareness, right? It's just going up and saying, hi, what you doing?
Sure.
Right. And that's where, and it's fascinating, the subject too, right? Because I mean, some of the most effective security organizations in the world, Israel, right? Their airport security employs processes and things where they'll just go up to people that may be doing something a little bit off and just start asking them questions. Hey, what you doing? Where are you going? And their stories fall apart really, really quickly, right? Because they haven't thought beyond that first level of questioning, right? So it's just being aware, right? In that example you gave is your awareness and your training was like, that's not normal behavior, right?
Brian,
or
about a
this
month
person shouldn't be here.
That's right. You're absolutely right. About a month ago, I was at another plant in Indiana, and I did a vulnerability assessment. But before I did the vulnerability assessment, the night before, I did a penetration test. True story, very short story here. And it was on the evening shift. And I had the orange bump cap, and I had on a yellow vest because temporary workers wear yellow vests. But you can get a yellow vest on Amazon. So anyway, I was walking through the plant. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. And a guy stopped me. He actually stopped me and he said, hey, who are you looking for? And I said, oh, I'm one of the temporary workers. He said, why aren't you with the other group of temporary workers? I said, well, they have me on a special assignment. He said, well, come on, let's go find them. I said, no, I'll be okay on my own. And he said, I think we need to step outside. Now, that's exactly what we want. That's exactly, you know what? And I was bragging about this guy. I said, if everybody, and the guy was nice about it. He wasn't being a jerk or anything. He was being nice, but he was being firm. He said, I can't let you walk around. You got to go outside. That's where we want to be, folks. And that's where you want to have your employees as well. The same thing. And give them some incentive. Give your employees some incentive. If they bring something like that to your attention, give them a spiff. Give them a $25 gas card. That's a lot these days.
Yeah.
$10 gas card is a lot these days. You know what I mean? Just show them that you thank them for being aware. And like you said, Brian, awareness is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Virginia brings up a good point here. Good to see you, Virginia. Right, so non-production hours, off shift, right? All the management goes home, and then you got the guys working overnight, right? Seems like you could have higher risk during those off shifts.
Yeah, you do. And again, that's why you have to do your vulnerability assessment, identify what those risks are. Then once you identify the risks, then you want to prioritize them. And then the ones that could really, really impact your business significantly, you're going to have to address those risks one way or another. But like anything else, you want to prioritize them. Let me just share this too with you, Virginia. When you do your vulnerability assessment and you list these risks that you've identified, prioritize them. And I've done that for years. And what I mean by that is when I give the report to the plant management, you'll see like a list of 10 to 25 things that I recommend that they do, right? Mitigations, right? But it's listed based on importance. And the reason I do that, level of importance, the reason I do that is because you're not going to be able to go out tomorrow and fix all of these vulnerabilities. But there's certain ones that you can fix right away and won't cost you a ton of money. You know, that's the biggest obstacle. Someone asked this question earlier, how do you change the culture? How do you get management involved? The reason that management pushes back so much is they're thinking one thing, dollars. It's going to cost us. And folks, it shouldn't cost you a ton of money. And let me just say this too, Brian, while I'm thinking about it. Camera systems, right? Ask someone like me or like Brian, who has a knowledge of food defense and the food safety side of the world, where to place those cameras in your facility. Folks, you don't need 100 cameras. Trust me when I tell you. I could walk through your facility and I can tell you where the bad guy is going to try to harm your products. I can tell you that right now. If you only had in your budget 16 or 32 cameras for the first couple of years, that's fine. But I can tell you where to put those cameras. A camera sales guy is going to say you need 100 cameras here, you need 100 cameras there. No, you don't. No, you don't. You need 16 to 32 good cameras, and I can show you where to put those cameras, and you'll be good to go. And then maybe in about 2 to 3 years, you might want to add a few more, but initially you can get by with just a few, depending upon the size of your facility.
Absolutely. So I think, this is a great point to kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. So I think, and again, apologies everybody for the technical issues. It's something that we can't control, right? You just have to work through it. But I think you can see why this is a two-parter now, right? Because Rod is an absolute treasure trove of information, right? All these type of things that we need to be doing. And we could easily, to your point, Rod, we could easily talk about this for another 2 hours here today, but everybody's got other things to do, which is why part 2 is coming up next week with these mitigation strategies that you're referencing. So that's a perfect segue on that. And this is why, and Renee is going to put here in the comments here, the locals group, right? We have to share information on subjects like this. We all need to figure out and learn from others' failures and successes so that we can prevent things from happening in our facilities. Because to Rod's point earlier, the biggest mistake we can do is to say, oh, we never had a problem before, we're fine, right? Until it happens. And then everybody is shocked, just like in food safety and recalls and everything else. You have to prevent these things from happening. You have to be proactive. Super, super important. So with that, I think we'll kind of summarize here. Any closing thoughts, Rod, on things you'd like to kind of close out with the talk today?
No, I think it's been great. The only other thing I would add, try to, if you can, next Friday, I'm going to talk about mitigation strategies, and I'm going to be very specific in terms of things that you can do and utilize to reduce the risk that you may identify at your plant. But I'm also going to talk about the FDA's mitigation strategies database. Now, if you haven't seen that, folks, prior to next Friday, Google it. It's open source. It's on the FDA's website. It's called the FDA's mitigation strategies database. Take a look at that, and then we'll talk about how you can utilize that, which is a very good tool to assign mitigation strategies to your vulnerabilities. Again, that's the FDA's mitigation strategies database. Real quickly, one other database, if you get a chance and you're just looking for something to do, look at the FDA's debarment list. It's called the FDA's debarment list. Some people call it the bar listing. It's open source. It's free. If you Google it, you'll get a lot of pages that charge $14.95. It's free. Take a look at that list. I'm going to talk a little bit about that list. It's really an interesting list, and a lot of people in the food industry are not aware of it. It's a list that the FDA puts out, but I'm going to show you how you can utilize that list, especially when you do background checks.
I wrote that down. I didn't know about that. So that's super valuable information.
Yep.
So, wow, amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Rod. This has been a great talk. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Awesome participation here, everybody. This is what makes these so fun. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this, taking time out of your busy schedules to engage on this important topic. And in closing, I think Rod here at the end said something really important, right? Is if you have information on a new subject, that's great. But as we talk about in part 2, you have to execute against that information, right? So make sure that you take this and then do something with it. So we'll see you back here next Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time where I'm at, 10 a.m. Eastern where Rod is on the East Coast. And we'll do part 2, mitigation strategies with this program. So everybody enjoy your weekend. Have an awesome time. I think I should say be safe. I think that kind of applies for us here today. And we'll see everybody back here next week. Have a great weekend, Rod.
Okay, you too. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Bye.